At AQA, we work with the UK's largest teacher network to shape the future of assessment. With teachers for students, we ask questions today that matter tomorrow.
Get a head start on your fresh start with Bloomsbury Education. With 30% off all our books till the end of September, this back-to-school sale is your chance to stock up on CPD titles, classroom resource banks, lesson ideas, and practical solutions to every teacher's pain points. Browse titles on sale from the Like a Ninja series, The Week Junior, and Let's Talk Picture Books. Perfect for the new school year. From leadership to inclusivity and maths to mental health, Bloomsbury Education has books for every step of your teaching journey. Welcome back to school at bloomsbury.com/back-to-school sale.
Over 7,500 primary schools are already using Capel Primary to boost confidence in teaching foundation subjects. Our expert-created curriculum planning, lessons and CPD are here to support and upskill you, whether you're a subject lead or classroom teacher. If you've got knowledge gaps in art, music, computing or beyond, we've got you covered. Head to capelprimary.com and empower your teaching today.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles.
Welcome to Teachers Talk Radio. Thank you for listening.
Thanks for downloading this episode from Teachers Talk Radio. You can find the full schedule and listen back to all our shows at ttradio.org. Enjoy the podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome to another Sunday morning show on Teachers Talk Radio for Points of View with our esteemed team of TTR experts, analysts and teachers to talk about, what's been happening in the news really. Thank you very much if you're watching this live or you're listening back. If you are watching it live, then you can get involved in the conversation on LinkedIn or Twitter or YouTube by just leaving a comment, and we'll hopefully share it on screen if you have something to say yourself. I'm joined by Carl, Lucy, Yasmin and Tarjinder this morning. So yeah, it should be a really good conversation. The first thing we're going to start off with is a comment from the actor Anna Maxwell this week. She's been talking about attendance in schools and special educational needs. What better way to start than to hear what she said?
That if there is better early intervention in terms of supporting the individual needs of children, valuing them, valuing their contribution, that actually if we put more money there, we can see off fighting a lot of the fires later on. It's funding and it's also attitude. So at the moment we have a situation that is completely punitive. It doesn't work, and in my mind it's ridiculous, which is this idea that if we crack down on attendance and we crack down on a word I hate, behaviour, we will have better outcomes. We won't. Attendance isn't the condition. We need to think about the root of the tree and how we support children and make them feel good, how their mental health is good, how they regulate well, and they will thrive and they will learn within the capacity of how they can learn. We know that. That's a fact. But we have a situation where we are excluding children, suspending children. We're fining parents for poor attendance. We're threatening them with court. We know that those things don't work. You can't physically chuck a 13-year-old over a school gate and say, go on, get in. They have to want to walk in and learn. And to do that, they need to feel safe and secure and like their needs are met. And when they do, they will learn.
Okay, we'll go around everybody, let everybody have their initial say on it, and then we'll open it up and have a chat about it. So, Carl, do you want to start off with your thoughts on this?
Sure. I mean, I think Anna Maxwell is a good woman. I think she is someone who clearly cares deeply, and she has a personal interest in this topic. So I understand that it comes from the heart. If you take that clip alone, it could unfortunately come across as something which is very much kind of all you need is love and everything will follow. And of course, it is much more complicated than that. But I do know there's a longer clip which does involve a more nuanced bit of analysis. And I think probably, you know, some of the words that she chose, particularly when she said, I hate the word behaviour, and, you know, it's a punitive system. They're caricatures. It's not just that at all. It's far from that. And actually, there are very good reasons why, without those suspensions and without those rules, you know, schools would just fall apart, and there'd be all sorts of horrible things happen. But by the same token, what she's saying underneath that, if you unpick the detail, I think, is that the root cause of problems that young people experience lie deeper in society and in our economic structure. And in that, there is a point. And so, you know, just as an initial comment, I think it's easy to sort of rail against what she says. And I think the first time I heard it, that's what I felt like doing. But actually, on reflection, I can see that I think she's coming from the right place, but she has made some points perhaps a little bit too in an oversimplified way. And she's suggesting that if only those horrible teachers were, you know, just a bit nicer, we'd all be great. And of course, it isn't quite, it's a long, long way from that.
Thank you. Lucy, any thoughts?
Yes, I mean, I totally get what Carl's saying. And actually, it did occur to me there would be more to that interview to unpick. The issue is that is the clip that was put out on social media by, I can't remember if it was the BBC or whatever. And that was the clip that then parents responded to. And when I looked through the comments, and I was expecting people to sort of to rebut some of it, or to say, well, actually behaviour does cause problems and your child won't feel safe in school. Like, you know, my child had. But it didn't. It was just loads and loads and loads of other parents affirming that. And the problem is, when you have that kind of platform as an actress, as somebody who's well known, people take a lead from that. And so that was my big concern over it. Was I thought at first, or maybe she used to teach or something, but as it went on and I looked her up and I thought, no, that she's got nothing to do with it. And when you see things from a different side, you have a different perspective. So that's what I felt about it.
Thanks for that. And Yasmin?
I think what I heard from that is I feel like she was just saying that a lot of behavior policies, or a lot of the things that happen in schools, are just reactionary or like reactive, and there should be more that goes towards preventative strategies when it comes to all kinds of things, but also children that might have emotion-based school avoidance. I don't really feel like she was painting teachers or schools in a bad light. I think she was just highlighting the fact that there is an increasing number of children, I think since COVID, that have been missing more than 10%, or, you know, a significant amount of school, and their attendance has massively dropped. I don't really feel like she said anything wrong. And I think for me, if there are loads of parents in the comments that are agreeing with that, then clearly it's a problem that parents are facing and dealing with. And I don't think her opinions come from whether or not she's like worked in teaching. I believe it's related to, you know, people that she knows personally who also experience emotion-based, you know, school refusal. And so that's where I feel like her stakes lie, you know, as a parent or like as a family member of pupils that are missing a lot of school. And one of the things that I feel like it made me think about was, I think COVID is sometimes underestimated, and I know that like COVID is blamed for a lot of things quite unfairly, or, you know, it's like exaggerated at times. But I do think when it comes to attendance, it shouldn't really be a surprise. Like, I think COVID was a turning point for so many people and so many workforces. Like, how many people only started to work from home post-COVID when they realized that they could still get their income from home? And I feel like the impact it's had on children who for the first time ever had like a significant disruption to their education over the course of like 2 years, and then, you know, years that followed where exams were changed and all sorts of things happened. I think that's had an immeasurable impact on a lot of children, and it has changed the way that school is viewed by not just pupils but also parents and families.
Thanks for that. And Tarjinder, before we sort of open this up into open discussion.
You know I'm going to disagree on this one.
I do.
No, look, I think she made some valid points in terms of funding. I think that's fair enough, and early intervention as well. Let's be fair to her. Like, she did sort of, it's not like she's just gone in completely ignorant. But like Carl says, she has caricatured the situation, and actually it's all very well having anecdotal evidence, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you can take from that and extrapolate it to the entire system and expect the system to change. So she's conflating various things like refusal to attend with exclusion, with attendance issues, and actually not just attendance issues, but with general behaviour policies in schools. And it's not necessarily the case that all those things are in fact related. You'd have to look at the individual situations and go, well, what is actually happening here? Because when I look at school refusers, the issue there is not the behaviour policy of the school, because actually it's neither here nor there. It's to do with their relationship with their parents and the school, and sometimes it's to do with moving as well. And I do agree that, yes, COVID has had an impact in terms of both parental and children's attitudes to attending school itself. But the point is, schools cannot just cannot be there just for those individual children who can't attend. We've got to think about, okay, the vast majority of children do go to school, they're fine. The behaviour systems are not punitive. In fact, if anything, they keep those children safe and they keep it a stable environment. So let's think about what the actual point of those behaviour policies is, because nobody goes into teaching. Nobody's ever started to teach the training course, as far as I know. And I'd say that, as somebody who's kind of relatively was seen as a strict teacher, but I didn't go in to exclude children. Okay, that this whole sort of trope annoys me. It's like everybody goes in because they want to teach and because they want to support children to build their futures. Now, if that's there are valid problems, fine, but I don't think we can just blame the school system, blame everything. Let's just go back to this whole thing, because actually, and again, like Carl says, if you look at schools where they don't have decent behaviour systems, are we actually saying that the schools with weaker behaviour systems have better attendance? Because I don't think that's actually happening.
Well, thanks, Tarjinder. I'll say what I think. So I did pick up some things from what she said. So she used that term punitive behaviour, right? I mean, she said she didn't like the word behaviour, right, in there, but she also used that. She said punitive behaviour system. So I think that's one we could maybe dig into in this conversation, because, punitive, I guess, means a punishment, right? Some might deem that to be a consequence, but certainly it's probably a negative consequence, a punitive consequence, right? Of course, I know I can sort of guess what she's going to say is sort of uber strict behavior policies, etc. is what she means by punitive. Right, I get it, but I do. There was a sort of intimation of the children just need to want to come and want to learn and be happy, and then everything's okay. In fact, at one point she even said, "Children will learn. That's a fact."
Yes.
Right. Well, I'm really sorry. In my career, it's not a fact. You can create the most perfect conditions. You can stop with all your behavior, punitive behavior sanctions. You can stop with. You can be nicey nice all day long, and some children will still not want to learn in any way whatsoever. Right? And that is the reality facing a lot of teachers in the country that, unfortunately, I think we mentioned this, and do you know what? I don't say this in a bad way, but I don't really care whether she's got good intentions or not. I don't really care. To me, it's irrelevant. She's giving opinions about the school system and teachers' lives. So for me to do that, I think you have to have a certain level of being informed. And I just felt that bit was a bit naive. Yeah. It wasn't my personal experience of teaching is not that. And I've taught in a whole range of different schools. At the end, she said the answer is to meet the needs of all learners. She was basically saying that's all we need to do. We just need to meet the needs of all the learners. There was nothing in there. And again, Carl, you've seen the bigger interview. I haven't. I've only seen the small sound bites. But my sort of concern from what I watched was there was nothing about sort of the attitudes that might need to change, or the sense of sort of losing sight of the most basic and fundamental manners and sort of acceptable levels of behavior that we've watered down and watered down and watered down over time. Now, I don't know, and this is a genuine thing for me because I don't know. We have seen a massive rise. The bit where she is right is where she's saying we've seen a big rise in SEND diagnosis or additional needs, a focus on additional needs, SEND diagnosis, requests for SEND diagnosis. Now, listen, it's EHCPs have gone up over the last, 10 years or 5 years or whatever it is. I saw a graph which basically showed it I don't know if doubled, but it had gone up significantly, right? Now, I don't fall on either side of this argument because I genuinely don't know the answer, but I do think we have to have an open conversation of, is it because diagnosis has got better? Is it because that 10 years ago, there were lots of children who were being ignored or let down because the needs were not seen or were not being identified? Or is it that we have sort of facilitated an overdiagnosis culture, or a culture where there is an excuse for everything and there is a possibility or an opt-out for everything that is uncomfortable in any way whatsoever? So, I'm experiencing discomfort. That must be because of X, Y, Z. It can't just be because it's a natural human thing of discomfort that you're experiencing, right? Yeah. That's again, I'm using a caricature there. That's a very simplified, we're on points of view, sort of throwing it out there thing. There's a lot, I could talk for half an hour on that, but that's a question I want to ask everyone is which side of that do you fall down on? Is it a combination of both? But ultimately, I just think the idea that children will learn if we make school less punitive or more fun or more lovely, or we're nicer to everybody, or we have less rules. I just think that's naive, and I don't think that is true.
Yeah,
that's my point of view.
It comes, does it not, from the fact that she's not actually had the reality of having to teach a class or lead a school. And if you have to do either of those things, you are very rapidly reacquainted with the reality of having to lead a large group of people through a lesson where there is a number of things that you have to teach, and you have to ensure young people can learn. And in order to do that, you need the environment to be calm, and you need to know that every young person in that room is able to listen and get on. And if you therefore don't have the authority to do that, because you are trying or endeavoring, however well-meaning it is, to meet the needs of every single individual, however complex they are, then you'll actually end up doing none of those, because you won't be able to teach the lesson, and the ones that do want to listen will resent you, and the ones that don't want to listen won't respect you, and the result will be you probably won't be in the job very long. So that's the reality. And I think in a number of different ways, we're all saying we've been in that situation. We know what that's like. And running a school is just a kind of, the same thing, but on a multiple level. And the reality of that is you can't just do that. Yeah.
Carl, just before we go to Tarjinder and she comes in, I just wanted to ask you briefly, Carl, because you are a head teacher, right? So I wanted to ask you specifically about that thing about the needs of learners, the additional needs, the SEND thing. I mean, do you have a view on that as a head teacher? Are you thinking it's because we let those children down, right, in terms of not having a system that saw them? Or are you more towards we're now in a place where everything is being seen as that, every discomfort and every problem?
No, I mean the latter. She suggested as such herself, and she was saying, well, she wants to replace special by individual, and I've seen various reiterations of that phrase in my career. Personalized learning and so forth. All very nice. But the reality is we teach classes of 30 and we have schools of, 1,000 plus, and you can't do it. No, I mean, there has been undoubtedly a medicalization of conditions, and it's unhelpful when many of those conditions are really a direct product of the environment that the child's been brought up in. and that was what I was talking about when I was trying to be fair to her in terms of the longer part of the clip, because she does talk about the problems created by poverty and widening inequality and all the fracturing of society. She does talk about that in other parts of the clip, but to blame schools or to say if only schools were kind and did everything to think about the needs of those young people when they come through the door, that would resolve it, is completely unfair and wrong. But so it's on the latter one. I think special educational needs have become too medicalized. I think there are too many occasions when what is obviously the natural result of a young person's upbringing and situation, but it becomes a medical condition, and therefore it becomes schools' responsibility to ensure that it's resolved. And of course, what really has to happen, but it's complicated and everybody gets that it's difficult, is that society and the way that the economy and society is structured needs to have a little bit, well, it needs to change in order to make that happen. So I'm on the latter one, Tom. I think that the reality is you can't medicalize every condition. You shouldn't do. And we can't afford it anyway as a society. It's a plain fact that, the bill is way bigger than we can possibly meet. So we have to decide where the balance is drawn. And I think at the moment, the balance is drawn too far in terms of, well, this is a need, that's a need. So therefore, everything must be provided through the system.
Can I just hop in really quickly? Yeah, because I just wanted to talk to you about Hachette Learning. This show is brought to you in partnership with Hachette Learning, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Level up your professional development today and visit www.hachetteLearning.com to explore the full range of titles. Also, the Chalk and Talk podcast. If you're looking for another great education podcast, check out Chalk and Talk with Anna Stokey. Anna is a passionate advocate for evidence-based maths education for students of all ages. On her podcast, she talks about everything from effective teaching methods and how-to guides for teaching maths facts to tips for evaluating research shows claims. She brings on top-notch guests, educators, researchers and policymakers, and discusses issues that directly impact teachers and students. Chalk and Talk is for anyone interested in education. Find it wherever you get your podcasts. And there was one more thing I wanted to talk to you about, and this was AQA. So AQA know teachers are the real experts in the classroom. That's why they work closely with teachers like you, combining your insight with their assessment expertise to create resources, tools, training and guidance that genuinely make a difference. They're the UK's most chosen assessment organisation, so chances are you already know their work. And as we head into a new school year, AQA are focused on helping teachers feel supported and ready. If you want to find out more about how they're working with teachers like you, just head to their website or search AQA We Work with Experts. Thank you. You're on mute, Tom.
On mute.
Tarjinder.
Right, okay. I mean, I'm not going to go down like the entire route here, which Carl is saying, which is like, oh, society's economy. Actually, sometimes it's individuals as well, and people do need to take some individual responsibility. You can't just say society has to like just keep shifting so that these individuals will shift. I mean, there has got to be something related to that. Secondly, I'm just going to be blunt about this, to be honest, because just looking at this woman, like, look, come on, if you've taught for a long time, you know that she wouldn't last a second in the classroom, right? They'd have eaten her by breakfast. And I mean, like, even the year ones could do this, right? If she was going down the route that she wanted to go down, like, and then maybe she should go and actually teach a class in the way that she can see the reality of that. Because I genuinely think she'd have to, like, cope with, like, some chaos here, which is just completely wrong. And I think the problem is when you have these kind of like floaty, you know, sort of like middle class people who've never really taught in a difficult school, who've never actually had the challenge of teaching any child, quite frankly, anything in terms of like teaching a class of 30, something actually academic or difficult or challenging, they can have all sorts of like, you know, like I said, these kind of like abstract ideas about what can work and what can't work. And the reality is we do have a basic idea of what works and what doesn't. And if we're going to go down the route of you know, punitive behaviour policies and impact on attendance. Well, I mean, you know, Michaela, you know, Catherine Bevelson always says that she's got the she's strictest headmistress in, you know, in the country. But actually, do they actually suffer the same attendance problems as everybody else? Not necessarily, because actually it's not the behaviour policies that are the issue. It's about those individual school refusals. And yes, I think we need to get underneath it, but actually this has got to be a joint thing. And just one more thing in terms of SEND, something that really hit me when a couple of months ago, when I was I just happened to join my sister-in-law for my niece's 2-year health check. And one of the things I really wondered was, like, walking away from it, like, how many parents are actually going to these health checks? You know, genuinely, who's attending, who's not, who's taking responsibility? How early are we noticing some of these things? Because to be honest with you, too often children turn up to school in reception, not even nursery, reception, and that's the first time that we have any knowledge of like what's actually needed. And if parents themselves won't take some responsibility for going to these to health checks and visits and starting to do some work with these children at home, or even giving them a basic standard of like language, of development, of self-regulation, because it does have to start in the home. You know, you can't just go do what you like for 5 years and then go right dump it at school and expect them to start sorting this out. And just one last thing in terms of SEND, just because somebody has a SEND diagnosis does not necessarily mean that it has to be long term. Sometimes these things are shorter term as well. So the idea that, you know, you're labelled SEND and therefore that's you for the rest of your life, it depends on the child and it depends on the need at the time. Because and it's not always academic either. Sometimes it's social. And again, in that situation, actually, where children need social stories, it can't just be the school that provides it. It's got to come from home and school, and that partnership has got to work. And while schools can push for that, and I'm sure, you know, Carl, you know, in his capacity does it as best he can, but I'm sure he'd say it himself. You can't make parents engage with the school if they don't want to.
I agree, Tarjinder. I think that was brilliant, and I want to come at this from a different angle. So I want to come at from the angle of sort of that parent on the outside, as it were. These parents, most parents, and certainly parents like this lady, their children are the most important thing in their world. And the impression I have is that there's an expectation that when they come to school, we should also believe that that particular child is the most precious person on that earth. But of course, every parent sending their children, your whole 30 children's worth of parents, all want that for their children. They want their child to be the one who was recognised, who has been spoken to, who somebody read with. I think for parents to understand that once their children get older, I mean, I think she spoke about 13-year-old, so I wasn't sure that that was her own child that she was referring to. But when they get to that age, they really are their own people, and we can't spend our whole careers in education trying to make every single child feel as special as they do when they're at home. So that for me was an issue. We have a system here where we're trying to create SEND hubs within schools. So a local school to me is going to have 2 old porter cabin classrooms refurbished and made into SEND hubs for social, emotional and well-being. And those children will attend those hubs rather than the main school, and there'll be a little bit of movement between the two at times. But my opinion is, or my worry is, there will be 50, 60, 70 parents at that school at least who all think that their child should be in that SEND hub, and it is going to be really hard for the head teacher to fend that off. So I think we need to look at this and recognise, parents need to recognise their children are wonderful and they have that opportunity to feel wonderful at home, but when they're at school, they are part of a classroom. They're there for a purpose.
Here's the thing, right? I mean, if you had a system where you had your large state schools and you then had a whole system of alternative provisions that were of a similar size and a similar funding matrix and a similar setup, then you might be able to facilitate the system the way that people sort of envisage it. But the reality is, you can't set up a duplicate school of every school in this country for... I understand the numbers might be cut in half, but that's still a lot of children in each class. You cannot fund that. No. So yes, when people say let's increase the funding and alternative provision, absolutely, sure, within reason, but we can't have I mean, listen, it would be wonderful. I'm a fan of it if we could have 3 times the number of schools, 3 times the number of teachers, And everybody who felt uncomfortable in one school went to the next school. Then when they felt uncomfortable in that one, they went to the next one. And it was the same standard and the same quality in every single place. And then it would just keep going. You'd have like 5 options. Listen, I don't think anybody would say that's a bad idea. But the reality is no country in the world could afford to do that, right? We have moved a little bit in that direction, not necessarily in terms of now, because I think funding could still increase for AP. But what I'm saying is we've moved to a mentality where it's sort of, how far can we go? Where's the stop where we go, actually, we're going to have to just say at this point, because she said in the interview, you can't say to a 13-year-old, just get in there. Why not?
No,
Why can
absolutely.
why can you
I mean,
not?
you have to.
No, because the point she was making is that school has to feel like a safe place for them. And that feels very different to different children. Like school refusers aren't like, they're not a homogenous entity where the reason why a lot of them have attendance issues is exactly the same and just replicated everywhere. That's what I got from what she was trying to say, that school needs to feel safe for them. And like what Carl was saying, I do agree that there can be there can be an overdiagnosis, but I do also think something that's massively ignored are things like stress levels, where stress in itself isn't a medical condition, but is a response to someone's environment. And if you've got children who aren't feeling safe at school for whatever reason, I'm sure it's very different across different families and different regions and schools or whatever, you know. But if a child isn't feeling safe and their stress levels are increasing, stress in itself isn't necessarily a medical condition. However, it's still a physiological or metabolic response and can have knock-on effects for the overall health and well-being of that children. That's just what I felt that she was saying.
But isn't
in that,
stress,
you know, and
Yasmin,
also
isn't stress a positive? Isn't stress a
no, so it
large?
can be. Stress can be, and there are times where being stressed out is good for you. We see that every year in exam season. You know, you do need a level of stress and adrenaline. And I do also, like, I remember when I was at university, I did, you know, I did a degree that focused on neuroscience, and one of my biggest interests was on the concept of grit, and you know how that can have positive outcomes for people. You know, and I know now it is, you know, a word that sometimes people get criticized for using when we're talking specifically about behavior management in schools. But, you know, there's a lot of scientific evidence that suggests having, you know, some level of grit, you know, can help you in your outcomes and goals and habits and the things that you want to achieve. So stress, you know, we couldn't live without stress, but it has to be, you know, within reason. And if it's uncontrolled, then that can have really huge effects on your health. And I think we're now in a situation where everything just gets lumped on schools and, you know, mental health services. Unless you've got like the most severe of mental health conditions, it's really hard for a GP will not rationalize or agree to refer someone. And so, you know, I don't think Anna Maxwell Martin needs to be a teacher or work in a school to have the views that she has. I think she still is informed. Like, I think a lot of the time as teachers, we use that argument, you know, you've never taught in a school, you've never run a school, but actually there are so many different stakeholders in education and in the overall lives of pupils. And I think if you're a parent of a child who's refusing to go to school, then, you know, you are a stakeholder. You don't need to have taught in a classroom or run a school to shape your views.
But you see, I feel that she basically, like I said, her platform has enabled that opinion to obviously be shared around various places. I don't follow her on any social media, but it came to my attention. So people are seeing this, and it almost acts as a permission. It almost then becomes a, see, I told you this was not good for my child, and my child's stressed. And when we feed back to children, you know, when a child falls over when they're small, if you say, oh my gosh, oh no, that's oh, your poor knee, they will cry for far longer than if you say, right, no, come on, up you get, it's nothing, we can clean that up, come on, we're gonna go. And if we're feeding back to children that their experiences are terrible, they will believe that their experiences are terrible. And so you know, she has passed on that message to everybody. Please tell your children that we understand why they can't go to school, and that they really shouldn't be forced to. That was my concern.
I get what you're saying. Sorry, Carl. I understand what you're saying, and like there's so many times on here we've discussed, you know, you know, like clockwork, every year in September, there's always something negative about schools in the media. But I do think as well, there is a growing like number of parents who actually feel quite helpless. And, you know, it doesn't matter like what class or background or whatever you're from. I think there is definitely a growing number of parents who don't know what they can do to support their children. And I think it's just more of an appeal to those families than it is maligning schools. That's how I took it. I think the people who take it as the most negative are teachers, because we've also got, you know, stakes from another perspective, and we know how much schools do to support children, you know. But I do just think it was more of an appeal to other parents and families than it was a way of like maligning or kind of, you know, shedding a bad light on schools. That's how I interpreted it.
Agree with you, Yasmin. I just don't agree with you. And one of the reasons why I don't agree with you is because bad parenting impacts on children all the time. We know this, and somehow schools are supposed to sort it. But let's not also pretend that there isn't an impact in a different way, which is people who don't parent their children properly don't have good relationships with them, and sometimes they do try and push that bad relationship and want it replicated in schools, almost as a means to justify what they're doing and how they're doing it, right? And we've still got to stand against that. We've got to still think, actually, what's going on here? Because you know what? Yeah, I agree to some extent. You can't chuck a 13-year-old over a school fence and make them go. But I do know that if I'd been truanting from school, if I'd been absent, I also know my parents' reaction. And it's a choice to be soft in that situation and not to look at the long-term future of your child based on short-term needs. And actually, I do think that goes on far too much, you know, like, or it'll just sort itself out. Like, it doesn't matter what they do in primary, it'll sort itself out in secondary. There's this kind of fantasy around this that some people like to hold and like to believe. So actually, I don't just think that she can just put that opinion out there and not take any responsibility. And yes, I agree that teachers probably would take it in a negative light, but at the same time, it's understandable why they will, because it's just a wishy-washy liberal talking nonsense at them without any real reality, without thinking about realities of what we're actually doing. And we can all go along and do that in all sorts of areas where, you know, like, I mean, I could talk about that, you know, I could go all wishy-washy in terms of economics, right? Because I don't understand certain parts of the economy well enough, right? We can fantasy ideas, but actually we do need to go back down to reality, because we're talking about young children, we're talking about people, and I do think it's important to think about teachers and their careers, because actually think about the kind of attitude she's holding, think about our own recruitment and retention problems. Do we really think that if we went down the route that she's talking about, that we're actually going to have teachers? Because I don't think that we would have, like, I think we'd have an even bigger recruitment problem, even bigger retention problem, particularly given the way the economy is, particularly given that there is no actual penalty to leaving teaching. And I keep reiterating this, there is no real penalty unless you've done something really bad. If you're just an ordinary teacher, you've had enough of teaching, trust me, most of the time, most people will just accept that as a good reason for you having left. And if you think about the difference that what people have to do when they have to go from one job to another in other sectors, where they have to justify themselves more, that's part of the reason why we ended up having, like, you know, so many people leave in the first 5 years, but they're fine. Do you know what I mean? It's not like we're thinking about this. So we've got to take this in the mix. Yes, parents are stakeholders, but ultimately they need to also be realistic and face up to the fact that they need schools with teachers and with leaders in them. Actually, they've got a responsibility to some extent to be reasonable and understand their role in all of this as well, and the impact that they can have if they hold certain views or if they push certain ideas in schools, which have already failed to some extent. Like Carl was saying, like, we already know personalised learning didn't work. Yeah. All it did was workload to the hilt, and resulted in a lot of people leaving or feeling overwhelmed. I remember one person leaving purely because of the amount of differentiation that was being expected at that point in time. And it's not like results improve. So if she wants to hold an opinion, if she wants to go out there, she doesn't actually have to go and think about what's actually happened within teaching, rather than just spout out.
Tarjinder, can I just say, for me, I feel like there's a huge irony in the fact that whenever like a parents come out to speak about their personal experiences with their family, in terms of, you know, school and emotion-based school avoidance, and a lot of the time teachers will respond to that by saying, you know, it's like maligning schools, it's unfair on schools, but then we'll turn around and, you know, malign parenting. Like, I feel like you can't make assumptions about parenting based on, like, you know, school refusal. And I know that even the term school refusal isn't really used anymore, but you can't, like, I don't think what is, like, you can't, there's so many different reasons for why some children's attendance has dropped, and you can't, like, I just feel like you can't paint all parenting with the same brush either.
Yeah.
Like, there are loads
Yeah.
of parents that are trying to cooperate with a school.
Yeah.
Sorry, Tarjinder, I can't hear you, but there are loads of parents trying to cooperate with a school. You can't, if, like, I feel like it has to be one or the other. If they should be allowed to say what they say, and it, you know, be critical of schools, or teachers also and schools need to stop then blaming parenting for these things. Like, I feel like you can't do both.
So sorry, Yasmin. If I can just add something here, I think Tarjinder, you used the word that aptly sums up the situation for me: reasonable. And I agree with Lucy, and I agree with Yasmin. I actually agree with everybody in the room today. I think there is a lack of reason.
That's quite boring, Carl.
Sorry,
that's quite boring, mate.
Well, I know it is a little bit boring. Sorry about that, Tom. I'd love to be more contrary, but the truth is that reasonableness is lacking in so much of the debate. What Yasmin says is reasonable in that, obviously, it is true. You're absolutely right, Yasmin. There are many, many people struggling with very difficult situations, and some of that is undoubtedly down to people who, let's say, haven't done the right thing, even though it's hard. But some of that is most undoubtedly down to, you know, a situation that they themselves have faced, and you know, the reality is it's extremely difficult for them, and so on and so forth. But Lucy's also correct, I have to say, in when she says, if you keep talking about something, then young people tend to take their cue from that, and they will use that language, and they will use that as a justification to do what is actually just a perfectly natural instinct of a teenager, to not want to go to school. And then if everybody else around them validates it, then to a certain degree, that's what they're allowed to do. That's not to say there are many young people who have very serious mental health issues for a variety of reasons. And when that's real and when it's serious, of course, everybody's compassionate and everybody wants to help. But there are an awful lot of young people, and this is the bulk of the attendance problem, who are sporadically not attending school. It isn't that they don't attend school at all because they have a very high level of anxiety, though there are those for sure. There are an awful lot of young people who attend school, you know, for maybe 3-4 days a week, but every now and again they're missing a day or two. And they're the problem in most schools. And if that problem was tackled, then the attendance crisis would not be a crisis. And those are not caused by very severe levels of anxiety. Those are caused by an attitude towards school and an attitude towards education in general. And to paint a brush and say, oh, well, it's all schools' fault is simply unfair. So, I mean, actually, boringly, yes, it is quite dull, but it is actually also true. I agree with all of you. Tarjinder's absolutely right. You have to take individual responsibility. People have to know that they are, as a parent, responsible for bringing up their child. They can't just palm it off on somebody else's, you know, blame it on somebody else. But it is also true, as Yasmin said, there are very, very difficult problems that people face. And Lucy's right. You can't just keep talking about it. At some point, you've got to solve it. And
that also, Yasmin, so coming back to what you said, though, earlier.
Sure.
So you said about 13-year-olds needing to feel safe. You can't, I think you said something along the lines of, you can't tell a 13-year-old to get in there if they don't feel safe going into the school, right? But I can think of examples when I was 13 or 14 where I didn't feel safe, but I wanted to go. So I'll give you an example, going to the Merseyside derby, Everton against Liverpool, with my dad. Did I feel safe? No, I didn't as a 13, 14-year-old. Safe within the realms of, yes, I'm not going to, I'm not going to sort of, something very bad's not going to happen. But did I feel safe from everything that was going to happen around me, and getting to the ground and getting out of the ground and getting there and getting home and all the rest of it? I didn't. On the back of a motorbike, I didn't. But the reason I didn't go to my dad, I don't feel safe. I don't think I can go to the Merseyside Derby today. I don't think I can go to the skate park and hang out with all those people because I don't feel safe because there's loads of gangs of lads. I don't think I can go to the cinema because on the way there's loads of the possibilities of what could or couldn't happen. I understand that in some cases that might be the case, that they might not feel safe. In fact, many might not feel safe, but this is where your threshold is of what does safety actually mean? Because they are in an environment that is controlled by adults. They are in a relatively safe environment. Of course, anything can happen in a school. You can have, gangs of people running around and different things can happen. Bullying can happen. That's always been the case since the year dot in schools, right? But you're in a relatively controlled, safe environment. So my point is like, I think what it actually comes down to a lot of times is, do they want to? And listen, I don't care what anybody says. You're never going, whatever you do with the curriculum, whatever you do with, teachers saying nice things when kids turn up and go, good morning, everyone. Let's have our welcome script. Good morning. It's so good to see you. Good morning. It's so good to see you. I'm really sorry. You can do all of that and more, and you can increase the funding level, and you can buy everyone an iPad, and you can do whatever the heck else you can do. You can, you could do anything, and you're still going to have more or less the same proportion, probably a growing proportion, actually. Because children like boundaries. A lot of them actually like deep down going in and having Miss go, why are you doing this? A lot of them actually like it.
Yeah.
This is like boot camp. Why do you think people go on fitness boot camps for 4 weeks and have someone shout in their face about how overweight they are? As I want to go, this is going to make me better, right? They're not good. They're going to hate it, but love it. Oh, I hate this. But I actually deep down love it because it might have a better outcome at the end for me because I'll lose some weight, right? And I'm not saying everyone thinks that way, but this idea of safety, I struggle with it a little bit because I just think there's so many examples in everybody's lives, everybody, minus none, where you are going to feel unsafe. But the only differential for me is, do you want to do it or do you not? Because if you want to do it, you'll go through a lot of situations where you feel unsafe.
Look, Tom, there's so many things I wanted to say there. Like, I feel like I've lost my train of thought a little bit. Like, there's so many things I want to respond to that. It's totally fine. And look, overall, I do agree with a lot of what you're saying. I think safety, like, I feel like it comes in a lot of forms. And I agree with you. Like, you're never going to make, like, every single person happy. And I do also agree that, like, they are thresholds that can change. They can improve through things like therapy or, being identified as a starting point, at least, someone's threshold, or being trained into forming different habits. Like there's so many ways to improve someone's threshold for coping with stress, or kind of getting over something that feels insurmountable and ultimately wanting to do it and give it a try. Everyone's going to have experiences of that in their life. But that for me goes back to what Anna Maxwell Martin was saying in that clip about how that there needs to be more that goes into these kind of preventative strategies. So when you're at that point of recognizing these things, what then happens? That's just how I saw what she was saying. I completely agree. These are things that can be improved. But the reason I mentioned that safety element, was because I wanted to raise the point about stress. If you don't feel safe, if your brain feels under threat in an environment, and that can look completely different for so many different people. If your brain feels under threat, then that's going to increase your stress levels, and that's going to have a negative impact on your overall health and well-being. And another thing,
every situation.
It is. But like, and again, like quite a few of you have mentioned at that point, what happens. And I do feel like one thing I want to say as well is I do often feel like school absence gets unfairly like blamed on like poverty and like poor parents, and poverty plays a massive hand in a lot of the problems and barriers children face anyway, or families face when it comes to schooling and so many things in society. But I actually think it's middle class parents or who are more likely to maybe allow students to, or maybe take self-diagnosis or these things more accepting of it. I'm not really making sense right now, but I actually feel like there's been a huge, like, at least in London where I am, I feel like there's been a huge shift in the demographic, of or the class of parents who are the most likely to now scrutinize, these punitive behavior management strategies. They're the ones most likely to have a group chat and to discuss these things, or to accept people who might self-diagnose. On TikTok, there are so many kids use TikTok now. There are so many different diagnoses, or people talking about their self-diagnosis and even their self-medicating, and all these things exist. Like, I had kids come up to me at school one day on lunch duty and say, "Miss, you've got super white sclera." Do you guys know what super white sclera is?
No.
I had never heard of that, and I'm a science teacher. Apparently, kids now notice the whites of people's eyes and what shade of white or yellow they are, and I just remember thinking to myself, imagine, and that's just a really trivial example that's just come to my mind, but imagine being faced constantly with videos 30 seconds to 1 minute long every single day of loads of people your age and above talking about things where you actually have no idea or no way of referencing whether or not they've actually got a medical diagnosis or not. And it's impossible to differentiate between the people who are actually under medical supervision and the people who are not. But all of their content is out there for children to consume, for parents to consume, many of which have really good intentions and want to help their children. So I think for me, there's too much to say on this topic. There's so many different threads that I could go down and talk about for an hour straight.
Let's let Tarjinder come in, because I think she's been trying to speak for about 15 minutes.
Oh, sorry.
At AQA, we work with the UK's largest teacher network to shape the future of assessment. With teachers for students, we ask questions today that matter tomorrow.
Get a head start on your fresh start with Bloomsbury Education. With 30% off all our books till the end of September, this back-to-school sale is your chance to stock up on CPD titles, classroom resource banks, lesson ideas, and practical solutions to every teacher's pain points. Browse titles on sale from the Like a Ninja series, The Week Junior, and Let's Talk Picture Books. Perfect for the new school year. From leadership to inclusivity and maths to mental health, Bloomsbury Education has books for every step of your teaching journey. Welcome back to school at bloomsbury.com/back-to-school sale.
Over 7,500 primary schools are already using Capel Primary to boost confidence in teaching foundation subjects. Our expert-created curriculum planning, lessons and CPD are here to support and upskill you, whether you're a subject lead or classroom teacher. If you've got knowledge gaps in art, music, computing or beyond, we've got you covered. Head to capelprimary.com and empower your teaching today.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles.
Go on, Tarjinder. And she's been very patient, Tarjinder, for the first time in TTR points of view history. And you've been incredibly patient. Go on.
I actually think are some valid points there, but again, okay. So let me put this down to I'm not trying to malign families and parents and all the rest of it, but we can't pretend away good relationships and bad relationships. We just can't pretend that away just to make people feel good, because then we're going down another. Let's just make everybody feel good about whatever they do, no matter what the consequences are. We all do need to think about that. And I agree, teachers need to think about it too. We do have to look at our environments and go, what is happening here? Is there something that we can improve? And I think that the problem is that we end up doing that far more than the other way around, because it's easier to push it on to schools. But I would actually quite agree that it's not a poverty thing at all. I think sometimes working parents sometimes can be more involved in these kind of situations, in the sense they're time poor. And what I've sort of noticed at one of the schools I worked at sort of years and years ago was that because they were time poor, they would give their children stuff. They'd be more likely to give their children a device because they can afford it. They're more likely to just leave them alone for hours on end. They're less likely to insist on things. They don't get to spend much time with them. So whatever time they spend with them, they want to do it and try to make them happy all the time. Do you know what I mean? But actually, that's a question there, because actually you cannot be happy all the time. I can't even make myself happy all the time. How am I going to make anybody else happy? So again, it goes down to that question of reasonableness, because we can't be happy all day long, all the time, because things happen. And actually children do need to learn to be comfortable with that. But that's got to be a joint endeavour, where we think about actually what is a good way to deal with that then, because a good way to deal with that is not to refuse to go to school. But that's got to be reinforced by within the family as well as the school supporting. It cannot be one group of people rather than the other. And it just seemed to me that this actress was basically going, it is just one direction, it is just one thing that's happening here. So if you're going to make that statement and you're going to push it all on schools, then you deserve the pushback that gets. If she wanted to be more reasonable and talk about wider points in society and what can be done, fair enough. But like I said, there is, even when we look at sort of basic things like the number of children who come to school in nappies, the number of children who are being, like literally 4 or 5 year olds being pushed in a pram of all things to walk to school, right? Like, they're not being given these basics, and then we wonder what's going on, and then they get diagnosed sometimes, and some of it's got nothing to do with that. We're diagnosing children who in other conditions may very well have grown up and not have had so-called special need because they lack certain experiences. So we've got to think about the outreach that we give to parents, but they also have got to take responsibility for what's happening.
I agree. I think you're absolutely spot on. And I was going to make a similar point, actually, Tarjinder, about the fact that obviously parents nowadays have to work. 2 parents go to work. You don't have the time anymore. You don't have the time to have that argument with your child about going to school. And I think there's a lot to be said for the issues of being too busy to actually dive down into the problem and say, right, no, I will be taking you in, and they haven't got the time because they've got a meeting at 9 o'clock and this is going to make them late. And I think all of those things that it creates guilt in you then, because as a parent you feel guilty because you think, gosh, I probably haven't given enough time, and so the next time you're nicer to them, and it feeds this sort of nice loop almost of being sort of super lovely, and if everybody else is lovely to my child, then things will be all right, because it's easier than saying, I'm going to have to actually put my foot down and say, I'm sorry, I can't come to work if my child is refusing to go to school, and that's difficult. And I have actually been there. So I'm not going to lie, I have been in a situation where I've had to force one of my children to go to school when I was supposed to be somewhere. And it's really, really horrible. It's hard because your competing needs of your job are against the recognition that your child should be at school. And I have a recognition that children should be at school. So if you're a parent who doesn't believe in the system or feels that the system has failed their child, then you can see how that will break down further. I just wanted to talk to you though again about Hachette Learning, because this show is brought to you in partnership with Hachette Learning, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Level up your professional development today and visit www.hachetlearning.com to explore the full range of titles. And also AQA know that teachers are the real experts in the classroom. That's why they work closely with teachers like you, combining your insight with their assessment expertise to create resources, tools, training and guidance that genuinely make a difference. They're the UK's most chosen assessment organisation, so chances are you already know their work. And as we head into a new school year, AQA are focused on helping teachers feel supported and ready. If you want to find out more about how they are working with teachers like you, just head to their website or search AQA, We Work with Experts.
Do you know what? I wanted to drop in a thought here. Have we moved from a place, right or wrong, where the concept of going to school was non-negotiable? Right?
Yeah.
When I grew up, right, myself, most of my peers, going to school was, I've middle class background. Both my parents are teachers, but actually a lot of the lads I went to school with were not that, right? It was a real sort of, a northwest of England. It was I don't know. It was Birkenhead, right? A lot of that wasn't the case. So my point is, a lot of them. But even then, it was just that non-negotiable that you have to go to school. That it wasn't even the question of, might I be able to? No, you just have to. Now, I'm not saying that. I mean, maybe the concept of what school is has changed. We've had homeschooling. We have, different versions of school or what education is. I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, but I'm just interested in this idea that it's become a negotiable now a bit more.
I think it's different for different demographics. I'll be so honest. Like, I don't feel like it is the same for everyone. Like, as somebody who is from, you know, like a migrant community, like first generation, school remains non-negotiable in my community, and it's always been the same, and so has respecting teachers. And, you know, I think there is a strong correlation between the, you know, kids that do well at school, or the ethnic groups, or I don't know, like there's so many different ways you can break down the data, but, you know, there are some ethnic groups that consistently do really well at school, and unsurprisingly also have really good behavior, and also parents that are very supportive of schools. So I think it's not the same for everyone.
Well, okay,
I agree.
I totally agree with that. But okay, non-immigrant communities.
But I would say, Tom, that it is part of a more general trend in society where people are encouraged to be so individual in their approach to things that therefore they don't feel an obligation to have a part to play in society as a whole. You know, it's as though, you know, you can do whatever you choose to do. And young people are, generally speaking, more than most of society, very, very influenced by what everybody else does around them. So they consciously or unconsciously look at what the adults are doing, and then they follow suit. Now, if all the adults are saying the same thing, to go on to Lucy's point about the language that's used all the time, if all the adults are saying the same thing and all the young people around them are doing the same thing, then the vast majority of young people will do exactly that. But unfortunately now, there are a lot of people, and there's a lot of language that facilitates a sense that if they don't want to, that's fine. If they don't, you know, and unfortunately, society can't function that way, because society does involve each and every one of us having to make compromises, having to make sacrifices, having to accommodate the needs of everybody, and recognize that we're part of a group, we're part of a community. We're not just
Carl, just to play devil's advocate though, does it or will it? Because with automation and with, you know, the sort of growth in AI and other things, right? A lot of things that you just mentioned in terms of we have to make a sacrifice because we have to spend an hour doing our washing. Well, you know, even compared to like 50 years ago, obviously that's changed, but it's probably going to change again. A drone is going to turn up at the window. You're going to literally hand the drone all your stuff. The drone will buzz off, and then the drone will appear at the window again in about an hour with all your stuff. Well, you know, this is sci-fi rubbish, but it's not beyond. I mean, it's already sort of happening. So everything's going to be automated. So is the idea that people, I mean, of course I agree with you, there's still going to be fundamental things that people have to do, right? But I don't know. I think society is changing. I don't know whether it's a good thing or bad thing. One thing I do think is that we are currently living in the most affluent time that probably, I mean, even my parents' generation, certainly my grandmother's generation, this is like affluence on a level that's just mad. I mean, it's never seen it before, you know.
Even poor people, if you think about it now, live better lives than some rich people did, like, you know, 200 years ago. You know, they just do, given what they have and what they have access to. But I think the point is, regardless of AI and all the rest of it, sometimes we just feel like we have to go with the technology. And actually, to some extent, we need to stop and think, is that healthy for us? Is it going to be better for us? And if it's not, then actually we do have some level of control. And the example I would give here is that it's really interesting that the Silicon Valley sort of tech giant, you know, the people who like invented so much of this stuff, they actually didn't send their own children to schools full. They actually didn't give their own children that much technology. They didn't send them to those kind of schools, sort of more like send them to like forest type school, whatever. So they do know the what's happening here. They do understand the influence of this. And I do think it is within the parents' control to say, actually, I'm not going to give my child a smartphone. I'm not going to do this. Actually, I'm going to like have certain activities. I don't mind if we as schools have got to like support some of that, which we try and do with enrichment activities as much as possible, but we've got to be realistic. Actually, we've already gone through this. We know that children, particularly children, but teenagers too, need to spend more time face to face with each other. They need to learn to cope with each other outside of school as well as in school. And actually, all of that plays a part in what's going on. So this has got to be something that's more fundamental than just school. People in school should be nicer to children. You know, like actually, there's probably, and I do agree with Yasmin, there's probably way more going on there. But I don't think that it's always down to, and what for some children it will be. There will just be a schools-based issue. But I always think when you look at it in the round, there's more going on here than just what's happening in school with that particular teacher.
Can I just make one very small point? And I agree with everything you say, Tarjinder. And I've heard that about, you know, Silicon Valley CEOs and what have you a lot. I've also read that there's no evidence to support that actually they send their kids to schools, regular schools, and there's no evidence that they do restrict their children from technology. So I think there's a little bit of urban mythology about it, but the point still stands regardless. The point that you make is true. And the point you make, Tom, is also true. And it's what fears those, fuels those fears about technology and AI that people genuinely have. But I think that human beings, as in the biology of us, means that we are still fundamentally wired in the way that we were 10,000, 50,000 years ago. Sure. And we need other people. We need purpose.
Yeah.
So whether the technology's there or whether it's not, whether we can work from home or whether we don't, we need at a psychological level to feel part of a society and part of a community. Because if we don't, we feel miserable.
But Carl, the point I'm making is choice is already going up and choice will continue to go up and up and up. So I'm playing devil's advocate. I'm saying, you know, in 50 years' time, no, even less than that, 30 to 40 years' time, right? Will people look back and go, why were they so bothered about kids getting into a building for this thing, this learning thing? Because now we're in a society where, as I said, affluence has gone up. So affluence is you know, in not globally, by the way, but in Western nations, it's where it's at now, which is unprecedented. I'm saying that, you know, we you know, there's all these complaints about sort of the welfare state and the benefit system. I think we'll move to a place where I don't think that minimum level, that the you know, it's almost like, I don't know whether because of automation, people will have a choice to just, they won't have to work. I mean,
yes. I mean, the death of work has been predicted.
Yeah,
I mean, it hasn't happened yet.
I don't know. I'm going sci-fi on you, but I do think we're quite short thinking. Not us. I think everybody doesn't know how things are going to accelerate and how things are going to.
You don't. I mean, the one thing as a history teacher, you know, and I know you're a history teacher, Tom, is that we don't know what. No, but we don't know what the future will be, do we? We don't. You know.
No, we don't. Exactly, we don't. There could be a massive war or famine or disease or anything that would completely change the scope. You know, AI could malfunction and like destroy everything.
But we can't jump in, can we? We can't say, well, we think in 40, 50 years this is going to happen, so we need to work to that. What we do is we evolve to the current situation that we're in. And actually, you know, when you have those questions posed to you, if you could go back in history, what one big thing would you change? Well, we are in history right now, and there are big things we need to change now. And so we are influencing the passage of history. And if we think that, you know, if we know that
Lucy, every Sunday we are influencing the passage of history.
we are changing the world.
I've got a question, guys.
Yasmin's got a question about changing the world. Go on.
Have you guys seen Line of Duty?
Yes.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
I just had to bring it up. I think since we were discussing Anna Maxwell Martin's interview, like I think that season where Hastings is like accused of corruption is probably my favorite season. So I just had to throw that in there.
But funnily enough, she also played. I don't know if you watched the BBC thing. It was maybe 4 or 5
Yeah.
weeks ago. I think it was called Unforgiven or something like that.
Oh, yeah.
It was based
Yeah.
it was in Liverpool actually, and she played somebody who I could imagine saying the thing she said in the interview a little bit.
But she does actually
Not
play
not in a
those
bad
kind of
way. I
characters.
heard that voice of her, and I was like, she could be
She's a
saying
great
that.
actor.
Yeah. She
Yeah.
sort of she
Yeah.
plays worried
Great
characters, and she's a
She plays
worried
worried
person
characters,
in
yeah.
that clip. Yeah.
Don't
Yeah, she
forget
does.
that actors aren't necessarily representative of society either. There's a good chance that, like, how moved are they? Like, I mean, how normal are the people that she spends time with? Like, I would just question some of the assumptions that she made, because there's always going to be people who think that we still live in like the 1920s in schools, or like, we've never changed, we've never evolved, never tried anything. Nothing's gone wrong. I mean, do you see what I mean? It's like that this sort of trope goes on and on and on. And actually, instead of thinking, okay, what are the problems and how can we... And I agree with you on one thing, Tom. I don't think we can keep increasing the funding for SEND exponentially all the time. We've got to start thinking, what can we actually do to support
I think
children?
it was Carl that said that, actually, wasn't me.
All right, yeah.
Yeah.
What can we do as early as possible to make that gap as small as possible? And also, what can we do to genuinely support and help parents and for them to be engaged? Because actually it is their child. And sometimes, maybe we know now in certain communities with people, they need to have a stern word. It's not just about being nice and lovely about these things. Yes, we're offering you all these things. Just had a child, and actually it is your responsibility, and you are shaping its long-term future, and you need to take that seriously.
Well,
I mean, sorry, I was just
Carl.
going to say, because what Tarjinder said and talking about the cost, I mean, that's what's driving things really, or principally. I know that in my own authority at the moment, according to the leader of the authority anyway, 20% of their entire spending is now devoted to the special educational needs and disabilities budget.
Wow.
Now, that is completely unsustainable, because either you have to have a much higher level of council tax or other tax, whichever it might be, which clearly there isn't a great deal of public appetite for, or you have to say, where is the cut going to come? And there are many other very important priorities: social care, policing, all sorts of other things that matter to people. So there has to be, politics is a question of compromises, and you have to accept that there is a limit to what you can do.
Well, I was going to say many councils.
I don't think that. I think there's a lot of people out there who do not think there is a limit to what you can do.
Yeah,
or there should be a limit. There should be a limit. I think there are people out there saying this is so important because we just need to. It doesn't matter if we go in debt. We've got to keep funneling money into this until it's limitless. Because
Except
it's about
you go
kids.
into debt, in the end, you do nothing. Yeah.
It's about the kids, mate. You can't put a price on kids' lives, so therefore we're just going to carry on and on and on. And I think that's something about.
I kind of agree with that.
Say again, Yasmin.
I'm joking. I said I kind of agree with that.
Yeah, listen, everyone's going to agree that more money, well, not everybody's going to agree, but I think most people would agree that more money should go in to improving kids' lives, but everything has a limit. Right? Yeah. Even, I don't know, I'm trying to think of historical examples where there's, even in crisis situations, there's still been a limit, right? And I'm sure I could find some.
I mean, a significant number of councils carry a deficit, a vast deficit, the school's deficit grant, and literally it's kept off their books. The government allow them to keep it off their books, and the day that the government make a decision that that's not going to be allowed, or if it's not dealt with, that will take so many councils under, because they will go bankrupt just on the fact, the gap between the funding for special educational needs and the need for spending for special educational needs. And if that's not addressed, and if we don't start looking at how we can deal with it without putting in expensive provisions, we're in real problems.
You know what, again, to throw in though, in other European countries, taxes are higher, right? In Spain, the tax rate is 24%, not 20%, right?
Oh,
so
I'm not saying that you're not wrong there, Tom. You're absolutely
no.
right.
I know. I'm not. I'm finishing my point. I'm saying that their tax is significantly higher, especially the higher up you get in the earning bracket. And I'm saying that I can't remember who said, it wouldn't be popular to raise taxes. Of course it wouldn't. But, there are lots of countries, particularly in Europe, with much higher tax rates. And then obviously you get, and also, I guess this is across the world, actually, but particularly the Western world, is tax loopholes for, companies like Amazon and all the rest of it.
But you're arguing against your own point there, because you've just said we can't keep putting money into this. And then you're saying, well, if we all paid higher taxes.
No, I said we could raise taxes. I said we could raise taxes. We could raise taxes and put more money in.
So we can put. So you think we should put more money into it then, and we should keep spending?
I think you've got a choice. I think not necessarily. It depends what it's about. But certainly, I'm not against having tax increases. We're talking about. And again, this is where people will disagree with, but we're talking about, in the grand scheme of things, very, very small increases in what people actually pay per month into their taxes, right?
Yeah.
If that's going to significantly improve things, then I'm not against that when we have relatively low taxation.
But I don't know that it will. It would have to be proven that it was going to significantly improve things. And all that will happen is, if we expand the system and say we can put more money into it, probably more people will come into the system. We will, we can't keep just, and you have to remember, yes, you can put a bit of tax up and that's really good and it gives more money, but everything else is going up as well. Our food bills and our heating bills and
no, but relatively speaking, we have lower taxes.
Keep spending, but maybe we pay less or more for other things. So
no, we
do you
don't.
get what I mean?
We don't.
I completely agree with you, Tom. There's no doubt. I mean, there's this. I was misunderstood probably, or made my point badly. I didn't mean we shouldn't have more taxes. I mean, I think that's part of having a civilized society. And the problem is we haven't had enough money raised through taxes, and the burden should most definitely fall on those people who are in the best position to be able, on the broadest shoulders, best position to be able to pay. That notwithstanding, as my point was, as taxes currently are, and what politically is foreseeable in terms of local government at the moment, the SEND system is utterly unaffordable.
I agree with that.
And that's the problem. And Lucy's right. It's over half the local authorities in this country. Yeah. I think it might be approaching 75%, actually, if I'm correct, are currently facing the reality that if it, as you say, Lucy, they're currently allowed to keep that debt off the books. If it was put back on the books, they would collapse. And when local authorities collapse, what happens is an awful lot of basic services, including waste disposal, including lighting, including social care, collapse with it. And you get a terrible situation. So nobody wants that. So there does have to be an honest debate about what right now is going to be affordable, given what we politically have. And the reality is what Anna Maxwell Martin's suggesting. It almost is like write a blank check, and that just isn't.
No, and I disagree. I'm absolutely on you guys. I'm agreeing with you guys in saying that I've just made my initial point, which was there should always be a limit to spending, even on this issue. It cannot be a bottomless pit of pouring cash in. All my point is just on the other side of it was, and this still doesn't qualify to having a bottomless pit, was just about, are there other avenues other than outside of cutting departments when it comes to tax? That was my only point I was making, but I'm not a fiscal expert. So it was just something that, I found interesting. Guys, we're out of time. We've discussed everything we want to discuss, I think, although we could just go on for the entire day and we would still probably be talking about it. So thanks everybody for joining in this morning. Really appreciate it. This will be available as a podcast if you've just tuned in. Thank you again to our sponsors, Hachette Learning and AQA in particular, for supporting this show. We'll be back again next Sunday morning at 10 a.m. Everybody wave. Bye.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.